Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we're in Damage Control Central on Battleship New Jersey to talk about if she could survive the damage that General Belgrano took on May 2nd, 1982, when she was torpedoed by the British nuclear-powered submarine HMS Conqueror during the Falklands War. General Belgrano is the only ship sunk by torpedoes from a nuclear submarine in combat, and one of only 3 vessels since World War II to be sunk by submarines in combat, period. The other 2 are the Indian frigate Kukri, sunk by a Pakistani submarine in 1971, and the South Korean frigate Cheonan, believed to be sunk by a North Korean submarine in 2010. Belgrano is also important because she was the second to last warship still in active service anywhere in the world that had survived the attack on Pearl Harbor. With her sinking, the Coast Guard cutter Taney, now a museum ship in Baltimore, became the last warship left afloat from the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is a pertinent discussion because Battleship New Jersey, at the time of the Falklands War, was being reactivated in Long Beach, and by the end of 1982 would be recommissioned into the U.S. Navy. The ship which was sunk, General Belgrano, was actually an American Brooklyn-class light cruiser, formerly USS Phoenix, which had survived the attack on Pearl Harbor and went on to fight throughout World War II and then serve in the Argentine Navy from 1951 until 1982. So it is a very similar ship in that it is a World War II era vessel that's been modernized and continues in service. It is during a time period that New Jersey was in service, and it was facing the types of weapons that Battleship New Jersey could expect to face. So let's look at the incident and what happened, and then we'll talk about if New Jersey would have been any more successful in this engagement. During the Falklands conflict, many people call it the Falklands War, but neither the British nor the Argentinians declared war. So during the Falklands conflict, the Royal Navy started out by imposing a 200 nautical mile exclusion zone around the Falkland Islands. So this was primarily to keep neutral vessels and aircraft out of that exclusion zone as the Royal Navy was moving into this area of operations, and to give the Argentinians a chance not to escalate the war. This wasn't going to be a war that the United Kingdom was going to end up invading mainland Argentina or anything like that. They just wanted to fight around the Falkland Islands. So regular Argentinian military assets in Argentina itself should not have feared being attacked unless they go near this exclusion zone. It's worth pointing out that when the actual shooting portion of the war started, the British said that the exclusion zone concept no longer existed. Any Argentinian craft that they thought were posing a threat to their forces in the area would be attacked. And this is important because when Belgrano is sunk, she is 36 nautical miles outside of the exclusion zone. So to this day, people debate whether or not it was a legitimate act of war. Interestingly, it's not just Argentinians that debate this, but the British public as well criticized the Royal Navy and the Thatcher administration at the time and to this day for, well, some of them criticized the administration for even fighting the war, but for this attack in specific, which, depending on who you ask, takes place outside of the area of operations. So, the Argentinian Navy had a couple of task forces in the area. From the north, they had their aircraft carrier, 25 de Mayo, along with some frigates and destroyers. And in the south, they had the General Belgrano, along with 2 former American Allen M. Sumner class destroyers, so similar vintage to Belgrano. And their whole plan was to pincer the British fleet. It is now known that the Thatcher administration, through some spycraft and some signals intelligence, had messages from the Argentinian Navy saying that they were going to enter the exclusion zone and attack the Royal Navy off the Falklands Islands, which led to the British classifying Belgrano as a legitimate threat to their forces, and is one of the factors in the decision-making process that eventually allowed Conqueror to take the shot. So, another factor in this is that at the time of the sinking, Belgrano appeared to be headed towards port and not towards the exclusion zone, which was just regular maneuvering, and her officers and other Argentinian naval personnel said that yes, while she was pointing in that direction at that time, she was not headed to port. She was going to participate in this attack. And following the attack, the Argentinian Navy essentially called off any active attacks on the British. So this pincer movement was canceled. The Argentinian Navy basically returned to port, and they relied on their aircraft for most of the attacks on the British Navy from that point out. So this attack potentially saved lives and forced the Argentinian Navy to stay away from the Falklands Islands, preventing further naval combat. I've been talking a lot about the setup because there isn't actually a whole lot to say about the attack itself. Conqueror gets permission to sink Belgrano, maneuvers into an attack position. The two Argentinian destroyers that are escorting Belgrano have no idea that Conqueror is in the area. I suspect that the Argentinian task force was operating without any active sonars or radars to try and stay hidden. So they did not detect Conqueror approaching them. In fact, the two Argentinian destroyers, in the foul weather that you get that far south, that close to Cape Horn, did not even know that Belgrano had been sunk and continued sailing off, even though it is believed that one of them was hit by a torpedo as well. So, Conqueror lines up a shot, fires 3 Type 8 torpedoes. One of the torpedoes misses entirely and is believed to have hit one of the Argentinian destroyers without detonating. They recorded hearing a sound, and when the ship was in dry dock later, they saw a dent in the hull that was consistent with a dud torpedo strike. 2 of the torpedoes hit General Belgrano. One hits the unarmored bow of the ship. Belgrano is a Brooklyn-class cruiser, prescribes to the American all-or-nothing scheme of armoring. So anything forward of the armored bulkhead was not armored or protected by torpedo defense. So the torpedo detonated there and blew the whole bow off of the ship. We see this happen to a number of other American wartime cruisers, including USS New Orleans off Guadalcanal. So not at all uncommon. The bow shears off at the forward armored bulkhead, and that forward armored bulkhead prevents any flooding from this hit. It is not believed that any of the 323 Argentinians that perished in this attack were in that part of the ship. The killing blow came from the other torpedo that hit right at the engineering spaces amidship, so perfectly lined up hit. It's worth pointing out that these Type 8 torpedoes are unguided. They're not wire guided. They are not acoustic homing or anything like that. They're just point and shoot like other World War II torpedoes, because these are World War II era torpedoes that were designed in 1927. So not only is it the sort of weapon that New Jersey could have expected to encounter when she's reactivated in December of '82, it's the type of weapon that she was designed to handle from day one. It is a weapon system that was contemporary to her. Conqueror did have more modern acoustic torpedoes on board. However, they chose, because it was a perfect shot without much risk, they chose to use the older style torpedo with its 805-pound Torpex warhead. So this warhead detonates and floods an engineering space, one of the largest ones, and because Belgrano is relatively well armored, that forces the blast up through the less armored deck of the ship, and it takes it through a couple of mess decks and other recreation spaces on its way up, which causes the loss of a number of sailors. Progressive flooding from this hit, possibly because watertight doors were not fully closed at the time, led to the ship eventually foundering and going down. And the crew does abandon ship in an orderly fashion, but again, because the destroyers that were escorting them were not around, had continued sailing on, they spent the night in the water in rafts and end up drifting apart. So there is the possibility that some of the crew who died in the frigid southern waters there. Because the torpedo hit in the engine room, it destroyed the electrical power of Belgrano, which prevented Belgrano from sending a radio message to her consorts and from effectively being able to operate the pumps to dewater the ship. And this, combined with progressive flooding, is what led to the loss of the vessel. So, the big question, could this have happened to New Jersey? First off, let's talk a little bit about Belgrano. Like I said, Belgrano is a pre-war constructed treaty-era light cruiser. She's armed with 15 6-inch guns and 8 5-inch guns. She also probably still had some 40mm and 20mm guns on board at the time of her loss, World War II era anti-aircraft weapons, as well as the newer Seacat anti-air missile system. She did not have any anti-submarine warfare capabilities, sonars, depth charges, anything like that. She did have a single helicopter on board at the time, which could have potentially been used to detect submarines, although I don't believe that helicopter had any anti-submarine capabilities on its own. The two destroyers would have been the anti-submarine assets along with Belgrano. Belgrano displaced about 10,000 tons standard displacement, about 12,000 tons when fully loaded. She had been heavily modernized in the 1960s, so a little bit earlier on than New Jersey's most recent modernization. 608 feet long, 62 feet wide, and draws about 20 feet of water. So a significantly smaller vessel, less reserve of buoyancy, and that's going to factor in discussing if this could have sunk New Jersey. Her top speed is about the same, 32 knots or so, and her armor is pretty solid for a cruiser or any vessel operating during the Falklands War, but doesn't compare well to Battleship New Jersey. Her belt is 5.5 inches thick, her deck is 2 inches thick, her turrets are 6.5 inches thick, and her conning tower is about 5 inches thick. So again, this is a gun cruiser armored against enemy guns, going into an engagement zone where there are very few gun-armed ships. Had she been able to get within range of the British fleet, she would have posed a significant threat. The question is, with British aircraft, with British submarines, with British missile systems, would she have been able to get within range of the British fleet? A little bit later on, the U.S. Navy does some war games in the Pacific, and Missouri is able to get in the midst of an American carrier task force within range of her 16-inch guns. So, in theory, this is possible. In practice, we know how this turns out. She's detected by a submarine and sunk. So, it was not possible, and the Argentinians gave up any hope of that and took all their ships back to port. Originally, when we were thinking about doing this video, I assumed my answer was going to be yes, what sunk Belgrano would have absolutely sunk New Jersey. Against modern homing torpedoes, torpedoes that can sail underneath of a ship and blow up below the vessel, breaking her keel, New Jersey has very little defense. She's got no anti-submarine capabilities indigenous to herself, and if she's being escorted by World War II era Sumner-class destroyers as well, she does not stand much of a chance against a modern nuclear submarine. However, Belgrano isn't sunk by modern acoustic torpedoes. She's sunk by World War II era, really interwar designed torpedoes, the sort that New Jersey's torpedo defense was designed to handle. New Jersey has a significantly deeper and more layered torpedo defense than Belgrano, and assuming Conqueror sees this ship in the fog and fires the same number of torpedoes, scoring the same types of hits, New Jersey is likely going to survive this attack. Behind me you can see some of the damage control plates that show the compartmentalization below the waterline as part of the torpedo defense. They did calculate that the ship could take as many as a half a dozen World War II era torpedoes before she was sunk. So a hit forward of the torpedo defense likely wouldn't have blown off our bow, likely would have done some serious damage to those storage spaces up there, but it wouldn't have threatened the armored citadel of the ship. A hit on the torpedo defense amidships would not have been able to defeat the torpedo defense to get into an engine room. A hit actually defeated our torpedo defense system and, say, flooded an engine room or a fire room. We had enough redundant engineering spaces and more redundant electrical systems. The ship likely would not have progressively flooded and would not have suffered the same electrical failures that Belgrano suffered that prevented her from dewatering effectively. Also, American battleships like New Jersey feature a pretty significant eductor system where you can hook pumps up to the ship's fire main and use the water running through the fire main to basically suck more water out of the ship via suction through this like S-shaped pump. So even if New Jersey loses electrical power, she's got significant dewatering capabilities left via the use of these eductors. Belgrano had this capability as well, but because so many spaces had flooded, it was not possible to use them. On New Jersey, because we are significantly more subdivided and because a blast like that is unlikely to open up additional bulkheads, we would have likely been able to get the eductors into the one or two spaces that were flooded and dewater the ship even without power. Now, let's say that Conqueror recognizes that they're facing an Iowa-class battleship. For whatever reason, the United States has sold Argentina an Iowa-class battleship instead of a Brooklyn-like cruiser at the end of World War II. If you watch the last season of The Last Ship, you see something ridiculous like this play out. Had Conqueror seen something like that and used more modern homing torpedoes, and more than 3 torpedoes, there is a strong chance that they could have sunk New Jersey. At the end of the day, even if Conqueror lands the same types of hits that she did against Belgrano, it is still a mission kill. New Jersey is going to return to port for repairs rather than continue to try and conduct this pincer movement against the British fleet. The repairs will not take place before the war ends, and so effectively New Jersey is taken out of action and the Argentinian fleet is forced to remain in port, just like what actually happened. So yes, New Jersey survives. No, there probably wouldn't be the same 323 casualties on board that Belgrano suffered, but the end results are likely the same. So what do you think? Let us know in the comment section down below if you think that the results would have been different or other mitigating factors might have been involved. Also, let us know if you have any ideas for future videos like this, if Battleship New Jersey could have survived what sank other famous ships. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to continue donating to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.